This is the 21.5 Show.
You're on 121.5, the emergency frequency.
Whether you're a professional pilot or want to be one, you're in the right place.
Let's get started.
Join professional aviators Dylan and Max as they talk their experience in the airlines, business aviation, and more.
Life is good.
Industry experts, unique stories, and plenty of fun. This is the 21.5 Show.
Here we go.
Welcome back to another normal episode of the 21.5 Show. After a couple of very polarizing episodes with our friend Roger Reeves.
Max, we used this vacation time to go try our drug running skills. It didn't end well.
We're coming to you live from the Lompoc prison, right?
The internet connection's not good.
Turns out the radar improved quite a bit over the last 30 years.
Yeah.
I knew those tethered balloon things I saw on the chart meant something.
Yeah.
Now they figured out if you look down from 15,000, no matter how low you fly, up thermal and land on a dry lake bed, they're always waiting for you now.
They're waiting for you. I think that's, yeah. Wow. What a run it was. We got so much great listener feedback that we're looking forward to share with you. The good and the bad. A lot of folks had their opinions about Roger's stories. I hope most of all that folks were entertained, and we certainly enjoyed checking it out and sharing his stories with you guys. Speaking of balloons, Max, the untethered variety floating over the United States. What a world we're in right now. I don't even know what's going on.
What did you think the first time you saw the video of an F-22 shooting down a balloon, essentially a hot air balloon?
Here was my first thought, because a bunch of people sent me the video clips, and I don't know if you guys saw the video clip that I saw, but it looked like the first missile missed, and it was actually the second one. Did you see that one? I don't know if that's true or not. But either way, the first thing I thought about is that poor F-22 pilot is going to get so much crap from his squadron buddies for shooting down a balloon.
I would have loved to just been a fly on the wall in the big conference room like at the Pentagon. All right, what are we going to do about this balloon threat? Let's see. Should we launch F-22s and shoot Sidewinder missiles at it? I wonder if they ever thought about, let's get like an older generation fighter that still has a machine gun and like just kind of graze the balloon and see if we can get it to come down slowly. Right. And then we can put one of Elon Musk's robotic barges underneath it to like capture it or something. It seems like send the F-22 with a missile was just kind of a full throttle.
Yeah, an A-10 probably can't go that, because wasn't that thing at like 60,000 feet or something?
Yeah,
like A-10 with the big gun.
A-10. I said like an F-18 or something.
Yeah, something with the big gun.
Maybe they should have called Tom Cruise. He could have got F-14 back out of the
right.
Shit,
yeah. It would have been
blasted
unbelievable.
Off,
the balloon.
But I just feel like, did you ever see those videos back in the day of the C-130 where they would capture, like, okay, you remember the Corona, the first reconnaissance satellites, and they would send film canisters back down to Earth, like re-enter and then pop a parachute, and they would come by and they would snag it with a C-130.
No, I never heard about that.
You ever see that?
No.
Yeah, we had so much more ingenuity, and this was like way back in the day. Like, and the best we could come up with shooting it with a missile and then trying to pick up the pieces in the middle of the ocean. I don't know.
Didn't we do that in the movie Air Force One? Didn't Harrison Ford like slide over on a cable to a C-130 too? Sort of similar technology?
No, that was a different movie. That wasn't Air Force One. That's where he shot out of the escape capsule of the 747. That doesn't actually exist.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. There used to be so much ingenuity. Now we're just shooting missiles at balloons. I don't know. But that was my initial reaction. I felt bad for this pilot, and I'm like, man, people are just going to give him so much crap. Because from what I understand, that's the first kill, right? Kill, quote out, or whatever it's called.
Of an F-22.
For an F-22. And then, like, of course, now there's all these other UFOs flying around everywhere, and then everyone's forgotten about the first balloon shoot down. So the pilot probably feels great now. He's just
I bet his squadron mates haven't forgot about it. I bet they're busy designing a patch right now that they're going to slap on him.
Paint on the side. And, oh my gosh. That's what I thought about, which is just like knowing pilots and being around pilots. I wasn't actually thinking of the mechanics of the balloon shooting down and everything else. I was just like, oh man, this guy's never going to hear the end.
Could you imagine after he comes back and like the debrief? Were you scared? What did you see? What was it like? Well, the balloon floated this way and I went this way.
He got tone first.
I was inverted.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I don't know. What a world we're in right now.
I hope they pant like one little balloon on the side of the cockpit. You know how for every kill, like a little bundle of balloons, like birthday balloons. What a weird deal.
I don't know. I'm assuming there's more to come here, hopefully. Joel, any luck getting that pilot to interview in a future episode? Have you gotten that?
Well,
No, I sent off
Okay.
a balloon message, but they seem
Hasn't come
we
through
keep
yet.
having problems.
All right. Okay.
Trying to lure him in.
Yeah.
Come on.
Anyway, let's.
Enough. Okay. Speaking of some interesting aviation technology, Max, you were in the air today in a classic.
Yeah, I got to aboard the Veris Jet Sales promotional DC-3 they have,
Ooh.
and we went on a little local flight, and they invited me up to take my turn at the controls. It was pretty cool. Thing flies like a truck. It's pretty awesome, though.
Yeah, it's funny you say turn at the controls because the thing looks like a steering wheel. It's like this big circle, isn't it?
It was funny because I was first flying it around and turning. When you think of flying a big airplane, you don't think of using the rudders for adverse yaw,
Oh, right.
Right?
Yeah.
because it's yaw damper, right? It doesn't connect in my brain like it does with a small airplane. And this thing, it's and the tail's wogging around. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. I don't think this thing has yaw damper. Like, you got to hit the rudder and use the rudder. So it was kind of fun to fly a big airplane that you was totally
You're just like kind of manhandling a little
flies
bit.
like a small airplane. Yeah, it was cool. It was awesome. It's fun. So I decided to go skiing for the day on Super Bowl Sunday. I was like, you know what nobody's going to be doing? Skiing.
Right.
And so me and two of my boys, we flew up and we went skiing. And as I thought, there was nobody there. But the funny thing is I had to return after the Super Bowl had already started. So there's this big TFR, it was like this 10-mile no-fly zone, at all. And then out to 30 miles, it's this big TFR, and you have to file a VFR flight plan or be on an IFR flight plan. And so I filed a VFR flight plan. It had to be on a discrete code of this whole thing. So I'm coming in, and I was like, hey, just before I was on the Phoenix approach, I'm like, I just want to make sure, I'm in full compliance with this TFR, right? They're like, yeah, you're good. You're good.
You're good.
It was a complete ghost town. I've never heard it so quiet.
No airplanes moving. Yeah.
Yeah, just some airliners going into Sky Harbor. But other than that, there was nobody flying.
Wow.
Nobody on frequency at the airport, on tower. There was nobody. It was like the calm before the storm, because I'm sure it was awesome. I landed, and by the time I got home, it was right when halftime show started. And then we watched the second half. It was perfect.
There you go.
My kind of day.
That's pretty sweet. Before that, yesterday, when was the last time you had filed a VFR flight plan, would you say?
I know. And I had to call 1-800-WX Brief. It's like, have you created an account? I'm like, what? How things have changed. And I called the guy. I'm like, do I need to put stuff in the remarks? Because it said be prepared to provide your certificate number, all this stuff. I'm like, do I need? And he's like, no. And then, dude, listen to this. I'm like, how am I going to open this flight plan? And it turns out on flightplan.com, there's a little button there that says open your flight plan. You can do it on your phone. And then you just close it after you land on your phone. So you don't actually have to call or tune up the VOR on listening and transmit through the RCO and all this, nonsense.
You remember you said Prescott Radio.
Yeah. Do you remember to close your VFR flight plan? I know. I remembered. I told my kids, I'm like, guys, you have to help me remember. This is going to be so embarrassing.
This is a freebie for the kids out there. Do you know how I remember to close a flight plan? You put your watch on your other arm.
Is that what you do when you cross-feed fuel too?
No. I put the checklist right up on the in view. Anyways.
Some people clip their tie to the chart clip,
Oh, really?
Yeah, some people will clip their ID somewhere really weird in the plane.
Yeah. In the 604, when you turn the fuel balance on, when it gets within a certain pounds, I think it's 100 pounds, it bings and it goes fuel balance.
Yeah, right. Are you serious right now?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's a 737, dude. You're lucky it tells you anything.
Okay. Well, there you go.
Hence the clipping your tie, to your
remember.
earlobe with your ID card and, putting your shoes on the wrong feet. That's how you remember.
Your shoes on the
Now, why? That's really strange.
Oh, I'm sorry. I stepped on the wrong rudder. Let's see. Joel, any reviews, comments from the folks out on the socials that we need to be aware of?
Oh, quite a few on the YouTube side since some new things. But one of them, Jenny from YouTube, before this interview, this was on Roger Reeves. They thought they had exaggerated things. Not now. His best interview.
That's high praise.
Wow. So Jenny is a fan of Roger. She's listened to him on the other platforms.
Okay. Mark, that is one in the for Roger category. I'm going to keep track here.
All right.
That's 1+1 for Roger.
Next.
Thumbs up from Tiger. He says, thanks for the wonderful podcast. Love the humor, the production quality. He says he's helped manage 3 podcast shows and know the work that goes into a quality product and the content.
Thank you, Tiger. It does take a lot of work.
Tiger.
Especially it takes a lot of work to get Max's headphones to work. I don't know if you got any advice for us on that, Tiger. Let us know.
Tech is not strong.
We've got such a full mailbag that I think it's time we need to jump into that. Of course, we do need to mention our sponsors of the mailbag, our friends over at Advanced Aircrew Academy. the masters, the undisputed champions of aviation education. Check out all of their offerings for your flight department at aircrewacademy.com. You've heard their expertise on many topics on this show. Weather radar, they've taught us about how to avoid runway overruns. They've got a great blog post right now about winds and breaking down about one of the latest overruns in Aspen. It's a great read. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. On to the mailbag.
Well, the first one, I've truly enjoyed listening to your podcast for quite some time now, until your interview with Mr. Reeves. Quite frankly, your golly gee whiz approach to this guy is embarrassingly servile and belies your published mantra for professionals by professionals and on a quest to improve. I was an MAF missionary pilot before my time at American Airlines. I can tell you categorically that MAF's emphasis on moral and ethical strength has always trumped their insistence on 3 years of A&P work before going to the mission field. Something in that story does not pass the smell test, probably not a surprise to anyone. It is obvious that you both have a disconnect between the before and after of drugs. The before is the smuggling, the after is the misery, broken lives, and collateral damage to spare. Your cavalier approach with him calls into question whether you consistently understand professionalism and at all its aspects. Have you confused commercial, paid pilots with professional aviators? Please tell me this is a one-off or make it abundantly clear that Mr. Reeves is the antithesis of professionalism and his decades in and out of prison were richly deserved. A morality tale of how not to do it. Respectfully, Dave.
Who?
All right, Dave. Listen, do we see Dave's point?
100%.
Of course we do.
Yeah.
But you have to understand, the point of this is not to present a potential career option for young aviators or anything like that. It was purely for entertainment. Everyone's favorite part of the show is the stories. And this was just a bunch of stories stitched together. And my advice is take it for what it is worth. It's entertainment. I would like to ask Dan, were you entertained? I realize you don't agree with Roger's choice of career path and whatnot, but it's hard to argue that it wasn't entertaining. Let's just say that.
It's very true. Well, I think he brought up an interesting point, too, where he talked about the difference between paid pilots and professional aviators. That's kind of a good definition. So maybe we'll have to dig into that sometime. And yeah, I'm just a paid pilot. Maybe next time you need to hire a contractor or something, be like, we can get a paid pilot or a professional aviator. Which would you like? I don't know. But we really appreciate the email, Dave. Like we said, we'll read the comments, good, bad, or ugly, and certainly appreciate different points of view. What's next, Joel?
This was from a former guest on the show. They said they never miss an episode and it keeps them engaged now that they're retired. That said, listening to your interview with Roger Reeves is like staring at a car wreck. You know you shouldn't, but you can't help it. To give this guy so much airtime is glorifying our beloved chosen profession of aviation. Who knows how many lives he's destroyed with his flagrant disregard for aviation safety and the law. I'm always a fan of you both, albeit a disappointed one.
That's -2 in the not for Roger, in the nay column.
Oh,
okay. Another great email. Appreciate it.
At least he admitted. It's like staring at a car wreck. You just know you shouldn't, but you can't help it.
But you were entertained.
He was entertained. Can we all agree on that?
I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but it did sound like that. So, okay, score is 1-2 here in the yay versus nay. Go ahead.
Next one. You guys absolutely knocked it out of the park with your last 2-part series with Roger. I was glued to my phone listening to that entire interview, and I really wished I was with you guys while you were interviewing him. If anyone didn't like that 2-part series, they're not true aviation lovers or professionals. The best aviation story you had was when the Russians stole that guy's plane, and he called DHS to help him get it back. You have friends in high places. Roger's stories blew that one out of the water. In my day job, we were trying to catch drug runners in the Coast Guard, but I just couldn't help but root for Roger and all of his predicaments. You guys are killing it with your content. Keep up the great work. Greg.
So we're tied 2-2. All right. Thank you for that feedback, Greg. I hope you enjoyed it.
It's kind of funny that he's hunting drug runners, but he's like,
I wonder if he's like, hey, let's go spend a little more time by the oil wells over by the oil rigs over by Louisiana.
Are they building any new highways? Let's see.
Any new highways? Good seeing any DC-3s lately.
We should start marking these dry lake beds and make sure.
Greg, I think if you really want to crack the case wide open, you need to start investigating these linoleum guys. That's where you go.
Go to the source, bro.
Really. All right. Thank you for that email, Greg. What's next?
Hey, guys. Great job with the podcast. I've been listening for a while. On your last episode in early January, you mentioned FedEx parking aircraft as well as its hiring situation. First, just want to mention that although it's true we are parking aircraft, we will end 2023 with more airframes than we began it with, as we're parking inefficient MD-10s and getting new and more efficient 767Fs, as well as another 777F. See the official fleet plan they attached, and so you guys can take a look at that.
Oh, that's for our premium subscribers. We'll be releasing that. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Using the same metrics, it would be fair to say that almost every airline is parking aircraft as they modernize their fleets. As far as FedEx not hiring for a bit is concerned, this is due to the massive hiring we did during COVID while the passenger airlines weren't hiring, threatening furlough and incentivizing people to retire early. While this was all going on, FedEx has been negotiating our new contract with a big emphasis on retirement. There are a whole lot of people just waiting for it to be improved before they punch out. I expect retirements much higher than projected as soon as the guys in a position to retire are able to do it under the new contract. Of course, this will take at least the better part of 2023, so I don't see FedEx hiring for the rest of the year. So in summary, record hiring and minimal retirements led to higher staffing levels at FedEx, while no hiring for a bit and even more pilots than projected leaving legacy PAX carriers led to this big disparity we have between FedEx staffing and legacy PAX staffing at the moment. Just figured I'd share my thoughts with you. Sincerely, Low Profile.
All right. Thanks for that info, Low Profile.
Yeah.
It's interesting, too. That is great to kind of get more context because it's so easy to kind of lump carriers in together and be like, well, they must all be hiring. And you don't take into account like all of these different things to appreciate, you know, what's the age on the seniority list? What about the fleet plans? All this kind of stuff. So it is really good to keep that kind of stuff in mind.
Next one. Hey guys, I was turned on to your podcast by a good friend of mine in corporate aviation. I just got my first jet type, Phenom 300, and work for a charter company on the East Coast. Previously, I spent 18 years turning wrenches on large cabin Gulfstreams for government contracts before my last year as a mechanic for the charter outfit I'm with now. Working on the aircraft had its benefits with ground school. Overall, I'm just an average Joe with a passion for the industry. Let's not forget to mention I love your podcast, especially when James O'Neill. The same group of friends who mentioned your podcast also turned me to James for my entry into being a pilot. I'm utilizing Raven Careers now. Anyway, my wife has been a huge supporter of my career transition. My buddy mentioned you guys did a bit for the wives, and they look forward to your reply, connecting with you guys at future events. In the event, and she's just a long-time listener. Thanks for everything you guys do to put together those podcasts. Stay well, Greg.
Thanks, Greg. Congrats on the Phenom type.
Yeah.
Appreciate the kind words about the show. The episode you're looking for is number 71. What is it like to be married to a pilot and raise a family? Max, did you know that is our most popular episode of all time?
Yeah, that's crazy. It kind of surprises me, but...
Yeah, so we need to do a follow-up on this is what this tells me. So what would you guys like to hear about next when it comes to sort of the lifestyle and family and marriage? We're talking about that and how it ties into aviation. So let us know. Write in info@215podcast.com and we'll see if we can provide more valuable content for that. Okay, Joel, read us that last email. That was a good one. I'm looking forward to answering this next one.
Gents, producer Joel's a great addition to the team. Maybe it's just me, but he kind of sounds like Quagmire from Family Guy. He should sign off the show with the classic Quagmire. Giggity. Go Eagles, Eric.
I love it. Eric. That's perfect.
You know, Quagmire was a airline pilot.
That's true. He was.
Exactly. He still is. Unless he lost his medical. All right. Well, we've got much more emails we'll cover in next episode. Keep those emails coming. If we're tied on the Roger Reeves tally here, so if you got more feedback on that, let us know. We had a lot of fun making it. Understand it's not everybody's cup of tea, but we'll be back to a lot more of our regularly scheduled content here going forward. All right, Max, getting into the meat of today's discussion, we have been seeing so much movement, especially in business aviation in the last year. A lot of that is due to money, of course. A lot of folks are seeing all of the very visible pay rates and contract negotiations and money that you can get at the airlines. Meanwhile, in business aviation, it's much more difficult to figure out where salaries are at, what's compensation, what's fair, what's the going rate.
Especially when it's changing by the week.
And it's changing by the week. It changes by the location and the airframe. And then, oh, well, some small airplanes actually pay more because there's just not as many sims or not as many pilots, So it's very difficult to track. So salary surveys, I think most pilots in business aviation are aware that they exist. And how many times have you seen somebody post online or somebody text you, hey, can you give me the numbers for, this airplane? but a lot of times they lack a lot of context and also the ability to actually know how to use those numbers effectively. So we wanted to talk to Dr. Chris Broyhill, who is an expert in this field, and he sits on the committee for NBAA that creates the NBAA salary survey, and then he also has his own website, the Air Comp Calculator, which helps flight departments to really dial in compensation numbers so that people can get an idea of what is going on. Because I think at the end of the day, Max, pilots are not trained in the art of salary negotiation for one, and also communicating with counterparts in corporate structure.
Yeah, most are just terrible at it. And arming yourself with the salary survey and stuff is just one piece of the puzzle. A lot of people, I think, treat those like it's the end all be all.
Yeah,
where to base your compensation off of. But as you'll find out with Chris, there's a lot more to it, and I think he has it figured out how to get this dialed in and give you real numbers that you can stand behind. So,
all right, here we go with Dr. Broyhill. Max, we are so excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Chris Broyhill. He is the founder of the Air Comp Calculator, an expert in aviation pilot salary information. He's done over 100 comp studies.
A favorite topic of all pilots, compensation. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you.
And so, Chris, this is such a hot topic right now. Pilot compensation, especially in business aviation. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the marketplace and what these salary surveys help pilots do?
Okay. First of all, salary surveys exist in every major field in corporate America. They are not unique to aviation by any means. You have information technology salary surveys, you've got financial professional salary surveys, you've got HR professional salary surveys, you've got them everywhere. So for them to be in aviation is not unique to us. It's somebody decided, a while ago that, hey, this might be a good idea. There are three major ones that are in the market today that I deal with. And let me just get off by saying, I'm a statistician. I became a statistician probably by accident when I got my PhD. I was dragged kicking and screaming in the statistics classes and came out of it severely mutilated and with post-traumatic stress syndrome, but with a great appreciation of the power statistics if they're handled honestly. And salary surveys, if they're done correctly, are statistical instruments, and they are statistically valid instruments, which means that if you go on a pro pilot world, you're not looking at a valid statistical survey. If you go on aviation professional sites, you're not looking at a statistically valid survey. One of the things is the data needs to be collected and analyzed by people who know what the heck they're doing from a statistics perspective, not just from a financial one. And then the other piece of it, in most cases, the data cannot be self-reported. You can't have the people reporting the data who have a vested interest in the outcome. It needs to be reported by disinterested third parties, typically HR professionals, who can format it better anyway and have more patience for the intricacies of their reporting process, et cetera. So there are three surveys that I pay attention to. One is the NBAA survey. Now, there are people in the past that have badmouthed the NBAA survey. And the reason was, up until 2019, the NBAA survey was conducted by folks on the NBAA staff who were enthusiastic and wanted to do the right thing from a professional perspective. They weren't statistical compensation professionals. So since 2019, BDO, which is a professional risk manager, instead of that commercial year, those who know use BDO or call BDO. It's those guys have been doing the administration of the compensation for the NBAA. And I happen to sit on the committee that oversees that compensation survey, so I have direct input on how that survey is conducted. And they're doing a great job. They have turned the NBAA compensation survey into a world-class instrument, I think. Then the two other ones are Gallagher, which is a risk management firm as well, does a compensation survey. They bought what used to be the Stanton compensation survey. And those of us who are dinosaurs in the industry remember Stanton. But Stanton was around for a long time, then Gallagher bought them. So now Gallagher administers it. Gallagher, again, risk management company, so they know what they're doing. And finally, there is the IBM ProMeyer survey, the IBM Corporate Flight Ops Compensation Survey. That has got a very limited clientele, only offered to companies that look like IBM. A guy by the name of Jeff Lee, who was the director of aviation for IBM back in the day. Together, they handed off the administration of it to ProMeyer, which is a risk management company and does this sort of research. So that, not to be invited to participate in that one, has a very homogeneous database in that nearly all the flight departments in it operate multiple airplanes, fly internationally, work for big companies. You won't find high net worth individuals and that kind of stuff in the database. In Comp Calculator, I've got two versions of it. The Air Comp Calculator, the version which is the standard version, which I offer to people who are not IBM participants, and then the special version, which is offered to people who are IBM participants. And I can only offer that to folks that are participants in that survey and have paid their dues to Perlmutter and everything, because that data, I had to sign an NDA to use the data, and it's limited to that data pool. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of each of the surveys? Well, first of all, they're all scientifically generated, so that's great. The NBAA survey is an interesting animal. Let me just back up for a minute to say the Gallagher survey kind of sort of looks a lot like the IBM survey, and that they typically focus on corporate flight departments, although this last iteration, they got a lot of fractional pilots, which was interesting because you would think that might bring the compensation levels downward. It actually pushed them upward a little bit. But you don't see a lot of charter operators in the Gallagher survey. You don't see a lot of high net worth individuals. They're typically corporate flight departments, although, as I mentioned, this latest iteration, they had some operators in there as well. NBAA survey collects all the cats and dogs, and that's one of the things that makes it nice. Compensation professionals and sometimes even flight department managers get very focused on benchmarking. Well, we should pay what other operations that look like us pay. And I'm like, it'd be nice if the world was that simple, but it's really not. Because anybody can take your flight crews or your flight attendants or your mechanics or your schedulers. They don't have to look just like you. So benchmarking, when you limit your considerations of other operators to those that are either A, in the same industry, B, in the same size of the flight department, C, the same net sales, which are all very common fields for compensation output to be broken down into. Nobody really cares. What they care about is, what are you going to pay me? I don't really care how big the flight department is. I don't care what industry we're in. Is what are you going to pay me? Because people cross, obviously, industry lines. On the things that the NBAA survey excels at, you'll have everything in there from smaller charters, larger charter operators, high net worth individuals, and the like. It catches all the cats and dogs. When we're considering what the world compensation looks like, we need to make sure we're aware of all the cats and dogs, because those cats and dogs can include the billionaire down the street who's willing to pay you $325 just to show up and fly his G650, and doesn't require anything else. Or they can include the stagey guy who's flying like a King Air and doesn't want to pay his pilots any more than $85,000. You need to see that whole gamut to figure out where the norm lies. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. So one of the things that's got to be really tough right now is that the whole industry, and pay included, is moving really quickly. So how do you compensate for that when the salary survey may very well be old data so much quicker than it was in the past?
As part of what the calculator does, it's interesting. I recently had a conversation with a guy who really had to use my data, but his boss didn't like it because they weren't the actual numbers in the survey. I'm like, dude, what kind of planet do you live on? It's never going to be the actual numbers that are in the survey, because all surveys, except the two we have in aviation, have a table at the back where you have aging factors for all the different positions. So the AirCom calculator uses two different aging factors. It uses, I build survey trends over like the last 5 years, since like 2018. And all the different positions age differently. Some of them, as you might think, like captains and pilot positions, age very rapidly because they're of the demand pool for pilots these days. Other positions, like schedulers, they don't age heavily at all. So you have different levels, but the bottom line is, so there is some pretty strict guidance about compensation survey, because compensation past organizations have got together, I hate to use the word collusion, but they've colluded to fix pricing ups. So when the concept of compensation surveys started to really become a thing, the federal government, and I'm not a big fan of government interference in things, but to their credit, this was some good guidance. They said, number one, compensation surveys need to be conducted by a third party. They cannot be conducted by somebody who's actually benefits from the knowledge of it. And you can see why, because it's going to bias the equation. The second thing is that there has to be a lag period from the time the data is collected until the time that it's taken. And typically, the agreed upon period of that is 3 months. So all data is 3 months old from by federal law, from the time it's collected until the time it's available. So those who say, well, I'll only use the numbers, and sorry, you're an idiot, because the numbers are by definition 3 months old by the time they ever come out. And compensation professionals, they take the numbers out of the survey and they age them. So financial professionals, IT professionals, HR professionals, those data are always aged into the present. So to your point, I know this is a long-winded explanation. They have to be aged into the current period for them to be accurate. So we do the best we can. The calculator uses a variety of mechanisms to do that. As I mentioned, we use internal survey data. I also cross-reference that with the Bureau of Labor Statistics stat, which is the growth of private industry compensation across all markets in private industry, just to kind of balance the equation, to kind of see where it's going to come out. But the cost of labor will always, as reflected as survey data, is always going to lag the market. The market's always going to be behind. That's why when I'm advising people on how to compensate in the industry, it's increasingly becoming common for organizations to target the 75th percentile rather than the 50th, not because they necessarily want to be exclusive. They just want to make sure they stay ahead of the market.
And then you have inflation too right now that really ages it even quicker, right?
Yeah, it does. And the cost of labor, I tell people that your jobs you're going to be able to reflect a higher degree of compensation for, like, say, California area, because the cost of living is higher there, right? And I go, no, I can reflect a higher compensation level in the California area because the cost of labor is higher there. Cost of labor and cost of living are correlated stats, just like they're not the same thing.
And out of curiosity, that cost of labor index that you were saying you also used to cross-reference, how does that pace in relation to inflation right now?
It's lagging, but they always will. So I use two regionalization cost of labor stats. One is as it's reflected in the regionalization factors that are present in the different surveys. The MBA survey actually does a really good job with that. I don't like how they divide it up, but they're very methodical in the way in which they do that. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has a stat that they compare the cost in various metropolitan areas, and this is why the CompCap focuses on metropolitan areas versus larger geographic ones. The Bureau of Labor Stats has a stat that reflects how much workers in the transportation and material moving sector make versus the national average, which, don't know how people feel about this, pretty much lumps pilots in with truck drivers. But that's where we fall in the way they rate, and you'd be surprised in some places that are high living areas, cost of labor for people who fly airplanes can be low. And other places that you might not think particularly high. Good example, DFW, in all compensation surveys, DFW is either classified in the southern U.S. or the southwestern U.S., and typically for most of the positions has a compensation level below the average. However, in the DFW area, according to the Bureau of Statistics, transportation and material moving workers make something like 8% higher than the national average. So you can kind of offset the down and the up when you find that from a cost of labor perspective. But to your point, cost of labor will always lag the cost of living. It's just because what happens is, oh my God, the cost of living is really much, let's push labor up to match that. And it never quite gets there. It always comes by.
So another thing too that's super relevant, I think, is total compensation when you include retirement. Because at the airlines with contract negotiations, let's just say anywhere between 15 and 20% is the contribution from the company towards your retirement, right? Because you could have the same thing where on a corporate position where the 401k contribution is very high at one company and a lot lower. I mean, we're talking 10 to 15 or more % difference. So how is that accounted for?
I roll 401k contributions into total cash compensation with the calculator for that reason.
Okay.
Because, and I do that if the contributions are immediately vested. If they're vested from a delayed perspective, it gets more complicated. But the 401k contribution, you have to kind of be careful with. I know everybody said, well, Delta is getting people 16% 401k contribution. Well, so that's great, but there are IRS limits on 401k contribution. So usually the 401k contribution is a match. It's not an outright contribution. When it's a match, as of 2023, you're limited to, if you're less than 50, it's $22,500 a year. So they might say they match, 10%, but you're only going to get to 5, no matter what. If you're over 50, if you're old fart like me, it's $30,000 for 2020. Now, if it's an outright contribution, there are different limits. I don't remember what those are immediately. But so other airlines just make cost to a retirement fund and separate 401k, and that's a different, because when it's a separate contributions to a retirement fund, they don't call them pensions innings. The unions won't allow that because then they're pensions, then the company can spend the money. Then it's a different bus subject to IRS limits. So it really is a function of how they're structured, and that varies from airline to airline. But I will tell you that one of the things that's very common in corporate America is for organizations to pay long-term incentive payments, where one of the common venues for them to do that is restricted stock units. Like they'll give you, maybe make the math easier, $30,000 of stock units that count toward this income for this year, but they won't be vested. You'll get a third of them vested this year, a third of them vested the next year, a third of them vested the year after, and a new $30,000 next year, and so forth and so on. It's very difficult to capture that in comp surveys. They don't do a very good job capturing that to a place where it's mappable across the different survey instruments. But when you're comparing to the airlines, none of that matters because they exist. All compensation is awarded on a yearly basis. It's yearly cash. Pilot walks that year. I like the back in the days of the pension fund. If a pilot walks that year, he or she gets all of it, and it goes as money into their pockets. So that's a difficulty we have to competing with the airlines, because typically all that you see in the business aviation world that's paid on a yearly basis is your base salary, obviously, any bonus the company might pay, and then to your earlier point, of whatever 401k match or award they may provide.
Well, and that's always been the struggle, I think, too. Dylan and I have talked about this, is that at a big company, they have their 401k plan, and it's the same for the secretary as it is for the pilot, as it is for everybody that's in that plan. So you can't go in and negotiate, hey, well, at the airline, I'm going to need at least 15% because I could make that at the airlines. Well, you just can't do that. And so
no, you can't.
How do you see people overcome that from a negotiation and compensation perspective?
It's difficult. So some flight departments that I've worked with, so in the compensation world, you've got two kinds of equity when you're trying to build pay rates and pay bands. One of them is internal equity. If a pilot's employment level is like, let's say a company uses E1 through E9 or whatever for the different levels, it could be at the E4 or E5 level, and he or she's asking for like $200,000 to fly a certain kind of airplane. An accountant or an IC professional might also be at the E5 level, but they're not making anywhere near that much. Do the same thing. That's called internal equity. When they try to make things equitable for different bands across the company, regardless of the jobs of the people the bands do. Then you've got market-based equity, where markets and hot skills jobs, that's an HR term also, drive the compensation lead up. So for us in the aviation world, it has to be external equity. It has to be market-based equity. It cannot be internally based. So that gives people in our industry who are corporations and starts, because they're talking with the comp people and saying, well, Jill Jones over there she's an E5. We can't pay her $50,000 to be in an E5 job when we've got everybody else making an average of $175. So the pay band dilemma comes up because compensation professionals in the HR world tend to think inside a very rigid construct and look outside of it, which has led in several of the companies I've worked with them developing their own pay structures just for the HR or for the aviation sector or the aviation department, because they can't fit them in anywhere else. And they recognize if they don't do that, they're going to lose people in the aviation department because they're not paying adequately.
So when you go to interview and say you go to a company and you're with the HR people, would you recommend claiming that you have hot skills at that point?
Yes. Well, so
you don't understand. I got hot skills, baby.
Yeah, I know. Right?
I love that.
That's actually the terminology they use. It's called hot skills.
I'm going to use that with my wife later.
Yeah.
Baby, I got hot skills. I got to go to work.
Yeah, come on. I'm busy. I'm in demand, baby.
I got hot skills.
That's funny.
You'll have to get back with me. Tell me how that works out. Maybe I can use the same trick. Who knows?
Yeah.
This is why I'm hot.
Yeah. Wow. So you're saying that, I mean, it makes total sense, right? Pilots are, trying to fit the circular peg into the square hole for many corporate structures. And
yes.
And so we're seeing these flight departments, are they breaking off into a new company? Like, can you talk about what you've seen out there? Like, how does that look in practice?
Executive compensation plan? Or
how does that work?
Yes to both of those. So yes, what they're having to do is they're having to devise separate compensation structures inside the company to do that. You can discriminate, and that's a word I'm using carefully, in your compensation practices for certain levels of employees. So for example, obviously executives are paid at a different level than people who are not executives are paid. Their ratio of base salary to bonus is different. Their bonus percentages are higher. They get restricted stock, they get options, they get other things that people below them do not. So what has happened is the aviation department has been broken off due to an executive compensation scheme for just that purpose, to be able to offer them, aviation department, compensation that is executive in appearance than it is like lay people are, like normal workers are, to accommodate, those differences. And it's been successful. It hasn't been legally challenged. I mean, so far it hasn't been legally challenged because the people put it together are pretty smart and they know how to stay inside the law when they do it, but they also recognize the necessity to do it, which is a feather in their cap, where a lot of HR people just cross their arms and say, hey, we ain't doing it. And then they have people walk out the door and then wonder why they're having to pay $100, $125,000 to type people in that new G650 because they're not paying them enough.
So if Max and I were in a flight department, he'd become like the president of the flight department, and the other pilot would be like the vice president.
Executive vice president.
Vice president. Oh, it's interesting. I think, we see that obviously. Now, here in Scottsdale, where Max and I are, it's a little bit different. We have very few corporate, like your traditional Fortune 500 flight departments. It's a lot more high net worth individual or 2 pilots, 1 airplane type setups. So less of maybe the infrastructure there. What are you seeing on kind of the other end of the spectrum of the high net worth individual with maybe 2 pilots? What are they doing?
Oh, I'll tell you, it runs the gamut. It's so funny to me. One of the things that's very interesting I've found in my 20 plus years of business aviation is that there's always something that wealthy people are going to be funny about. You're just not going to know what it is till you stumble across it.
Yep.
For some people, it's compensation. I had a friend that had a really good job flying a G650 for a very wealthy individual in the Midwest. The guy paid really, really well, but he expected them to be at his beck and call all the time. And when they weren't at his beck and call, he got ticked off about it to the point where my friend's, his wife's dad was literally dying of cancer, and his wife needed to go tend to provide hospice care and just be there. And my friend presented his dilemma to his employer, and his employer said, and he says, I got to stay home with Mr. Mom while my wife's away taking care of this stuff. And his employer said, you need to make other arrangements. We're going to go fly. And so he voted with his feet and walked out. Why am I saying that? So there are people that are running the gamut. You have people that will fly, pay exorbitant amounts to keep somebody position. Part of the management company, there was one individual that was paying one gentleman $350,000 a year just to run a 1 aircraft flight department. Then you've got other wealthy individuals where you have to pull the compensation out of them kicking and screaming, and you have to show it to them. There's a client I had, they're flying a Chalp in New England with a management company, and basically was just asking for a reasonable level, a 50th percentile level of compensation, and wasn't getting it to run a 2 aircraft flight department because the wealthy individuals just refused to believe that kind of compensation was real. We were talking before the show, obviously, about how you get people that believe the data and people that don't believe the data. This guy was a non-believer. You could show right in front of his face, this is what the data command. It can't be that. So again, yet another long-winded answer. You got people that run the entire, there are going to be those that are willing to pay top-notch to keep the people they want. And then you've got the other people that you have to drive the compensation out of them kicking and screaming because they just refuse to pay more, which is ironic. They can afford to fly an airplane, but when it comes to fair wage, somehow that's offensive to them. And that's a dilemma I have never understood, but it is a common in our industry and just makes you want to smack yourself upside the head wondering why.
Well, it's just funny. Like you mentioned that, and I think anyone that's worked in business aviation knows it's true. There's usually one quirk that gets the boss.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the cost of catering. Sometimes it's the expense of usually one thing that just kills them. And you're like, but yeah, dude, we just spent like $10,000 on fuel to get here. And then you're dying over, your $200 charcuterie board or something. But it's just, it's a mindset thing, right? It's not the actual, numbers. And you must just see that a lot, Chris. It's got to be.
It is exactly that. No, I do see it a lot. And I'll tell you, I've been very, very successful. The AirComp calculator is used by a lot of management companies right now. One of the ways in which it's had great success is it allows the management company who want to go to the aircraft owners and say, here's what an industry expert on compensation thinks these people should be paid, and here's the data. And the people, in the decision-making position go, wow, yeah, that's good. Good data. Okay, you show me the data. I believe you. And here we go. But there will be those who will just say, no, I don't care if the business says this. They're just flying the airplane. They've only got my life in their hands, but forget about that for a second. I'm not going to pay somebody an airplane that amount of money. That's crazy. It's nuts.
Oh, Max, all of this talk about salary numbers makes me think about, what do you do when you negotiate that huge raise? Who's going to help you with all those dollars?
Well, let me give you 2 options. You're either going to A, buy a boat, or B, call our boy Tim Pope, certified financial planner.
Yeah, Tim helps professional pilots nationwide create and execute a smart financial strategy. Check out the show notes for the link to set up your appointment with Tim. He'll be happy to give you a free 15-minute consultation and you can figure out what to do with all those dollars. All right, back to the show. So let's talk a little bit about the rubber meeting the road, how we actually implement change here using these tools. So I would imagine that for these salary surveys, mostly HR professionals at your company are not aware of these tools that are out there, and the pilot has to send it to them. Is that what you're seeing? Or do you actually see HR professionals reaching out to you? How does that work right now?
Pretty much all of the above. Some of my clients are HR professionals. I've done compensation studies for the HR departments of several different companies that the HR compensation departments are actually the ones that bought the AirComp calculator because so offer compensation professionals some credit. They kind of have to be jacks of all trades because they have to understand compensation, a variety of different industries, not just, aviation, but as we keep mentioning, the big three, financial professionals, IT professionals, HR professionals, typically people that are in support roles.
Hot skills.
They have to understand the nuances of compensation across all of those industries. Aviation is a particularly arcane profession, requiring highly specialized knowledge and understanding that go far beyond what they will ever be capable of. So they come to me and say, Broy, no, we don't want to think about all this stuff. You're the expert. Give us the data. I have to explain my methodology. And with HR professionals, I can get really in depth because they get it. And they just say, glad you're doing this because we don't want to do it. Here we are washing our hands of it. We'll rely on you. So I've had a lot of success with HR professionals. I will tell you that I've had pilots and aviation managers who have bought my product and have then forwarded it to HR professionals and said, this is what the experts say we should be doing. And in a lot of cases, get online and walk them through the data, and provide a presentation. Once in a while, you run into Sayer, but as I told you before, that's typical. It happens. But yeah, you sometimes. So your HR professionals in a company that has an aviation department probably know about the surveys. They probably know about the MBAA survey. They probably know about the Gallagher survey. If they don't, then the aviation professionals can forward links to those surveys. They normally don't know about me unless they've heard about me some way, somehow, or I am introduced to them through the aviation manager. And as I mentioned, I hook up with compensation professionals. They are usually very glad to get me on board because they like using the data.
That makes sense. I feel like in the past, pilots would scour the internet, find the numbers, from the survey, and then, off they go to the meeting, and that's it. They have a number, which they probably can't really articulate where it came from and how it was derived, but, that's what they see online, or this is what everyone in the hangar is getting paid, etc. It just feels like that just doesn't hold a lot of water, especially when pilots, I think, in many cases are not great negotiators. And so it seems to make a lot more sense to actually have somebody that can articulate, this is where the information came from. That third party, I think, is what's really missing in a lot of these negotiations.
It is. And let me give everybody who's listening a hint. The best way to start any sort of discussion about compensation is that Bill and Bob across the field are making this much. That's not going to work. It's anecdotal, and it's not proof of anything other than Bill and Bob are making that much across the field. So starting any kind of negotiation using that is not going to get you anywhere. If you're going to go into a survey, I'll challenge you, what number are you going to pick and why are you going to pick it? What's your method? Why are you choosing that number and what's your rationale for choosing it? And pilots, in most cases, stink at making those decisions, not because they're stupid, but because they don't know the tool that well and they haven't devoted the time to getting into it with it. I mean, I live my life in this area and HR comp professionals do too, but I will tell you, so an HR compensation professional works for the company. They don't work for you. They work for the company. So they try to find the lowest number that fits with the expectation to keep the total cost down for the company. They can. Now, if there are faith arguments to say that maybe picking the lowest number isn't the best way to go about things, they might have a change of heart, but by and large, they're going to be think best for the company, not what's best for you. And whatever the lowest number is, they can get out the door with what to do. For me, I'm agnostic. The data is the data. The methodology is methodology, says what the number says. If your comp is above or below it, that's where it is, but the data is the data.
So walk us through kind of what you would say is the right way to do it. We stumbled across your website. I'm just a director of let's say 1 airplane, 2 pilots. We know we need to get a raise. We know we're underpaid. What's the right way to go about it? And kind of walk us through the process of every step of what that would be.
From a pilot's perspective, what would you do?
If you're going to use my product, what you do is you go online, you buy a report or reports. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. I work on 3 different levels. Number 1, I sell you the report. You just print out the compensation ranges and away you go. And you've got compensation ranges for your position that you can go negotiate with. So I provide that. I have a white paper that talks about how the methodology works if people want it. Typically happen on my website. It explains how I derive the methodology. Obviously, there's a degree of secret sauce in here that I prefer to keep proprietary. But my website does a pretty good job of describing how the methodology works. If somebody calls me and wants a more detailed discussion methodology, I provide that. And then I have a white paper that I wrote also that goes through the methodology. Also, if they need something in hard copy, they can forward to somebody and say, here's where this guy gets the data. And also, I've taken several calls from HR professionals after they've gotten the reports and said, our pilots down the flight department forwarded us this. We'd like to understand more about how it works. Can you tell us? And I do. I take the time to do that. So you basically get a report or reports. If you get a comparison built in there, and if you buy a report with a comparison, and then I throw a few sage words of wisdom about my observations or recommendations for where your comp is versus, where it could be. And that's one methodology. The other one is I do a deep dive study on your position, your location, and then that not only includes a comparison, but it also includes I'm mapping against 3 different airlines. I map against Delta, and I map against Southwest, and I map against FedEx. And I show where your comp intersects those lines and possibility of you being a flight risk, with no pun intended, to the airlines because what you're making versus what you can make with the airlines and that sort of thing. And in some cases, if I can't, for a general venue like this, tell you what those numbers will be, but as you might expect, lower numbers generate higher flight risk, higher numbers generate lower flight risk. If you're a younger person, your goal is to make money in aviation, the place to realize that is the airlines. If you want to be a mercenary, you need to go to the airlines because business aviation will never pay you what you can make in the airlines. You just can't, based on the way the unions have set up the contracts. But what you can do is pay enough or earn enough to increase the window of uncertainty such that it's going to take you long enough if you go to the airlines to recapture what you're making in business aviation that you don't want to lose all that time or risk all that money in the meantime. So it's like, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. Or you want a reason to stay in the job you're in, certain method doing the things you do. I had one person I did a compensation study for. It was actually a full retention study. It was an organization on the East Coast, and they were at the forefront. It was like FOCA and SMS and that sort of thing. And they were, to a person, everybody in the department liked the leadership of the company. They liked the leadership of the department. They liked the people they work with. They enjoyed coming to work every single day. But the company paid them so low, they felt like they were being undervalued. And I talk about there's 3 pillars to the retention equation. They all stand on the foundation of leadership, of course, but the 3 pillars are compensation, quality of life, and then the organizational culture. And those 3 pillars are not discrete. Sometimes that compensation pillar can wind up in the organizational culture, because if your organization isn't paying you what you think you're worth, then that's going to affect your morale and what you think about the culture. So they can cross-pollinate, if you will.
You said a couple of things, which I think most people understand, right? If you want to make money, you're going to go to the airlines. For the vast majority of pilots, that's where the money's going to be made. But from a quality of life standpoint, there are certainly business aviation jobs that are going to give you a better quality of life. And I think as you talk about that quality of life piece, you participated in that small flight department symposium we did at NBAA, and we did a question there. We did a poll of everyone that attended, and we said, would you rather get a significant raise at your job? I think we said maybe 40%. Or would you rather that your flight department hires another pilot or a third pilot or maybe a fifth pilot, depending on how many airplanes? And the overwhelming response was, we'd rather that you hire another pilot than pay us more, because we just want more time off, or we want more schedule kind of knowledge of the schedule and time off and things like that. So how do you blend that in there too, where you could tell them, pay these guys an extra $75,000, or maybe it's better not to pay your pilots more, but hire a third pilot. Do you get into those discussions? How do you look at that?
Absolutely. No, I totally do. So one of the reasons I generate compensation ranges, the single numbers for compensation, is to give people some latitude and how they use the data. And my pitch for that is, if people are having higher quality of life, for example, if you've got a flight department where you're only away 3 or 4 days a month, you can largely predict your life. You'd be more willing to take a lower level of compensation, if you're reasonable, that is, than somebody who's being ridden hard, put it away wet, on a monthly basis, where you're always gone and you make Ambassador Elite Marriott by like March or something like that.
Hot skills.
So that kind of thing. If they're working you really super hard, then the pay needs to be commensurate, but it's a balance. And one of the dilemmas of the data, or the shortcomings of the data that I find, is that people always ask me, well, we're a flight department, we fly, we've only got X amount of pilots, we fly these many days a month, we're really working hard here. What does the data say about that? My answer to that is nothing. The data does not correlate, sadly, how many days a week or how many days a month you're gone. It doesn't correlate with how many hours a year you fly. It doesn't correlate with how many nights you spend on the road or how many weekends away you spend. It doesn't correlate with any of that. It doesn't correlate to how long you've been in the industry. Also, it doesn't correlate to how long you've been in the company. Because of all the odd data points people will pay to get the right person in the right job at the right time. But what you can do is display latitude in how you pay people, how hard you're working them, and make that rational argument. Something you can do.
That makes sense.
All right, Chris, I have a question for you. Since you look at this data all day long, What would you say right now, which metropolitan area pays the most for business aviation pilots?
It'd either be Seattle or the Bay Area of San Francisco, without parallel. I mean, those two areas are the highest cost of labor areas in the nation. Across the board, typically, but generally the big stuff, the bigger, sexier stuff, the G650s, G600s, that sort of thing. Oh, yeah, the Global 7500s and 7000s, that sort of thing.
I love that you mentioned earlier kind of how DFW is sort of in that, like, I don't know what you call it, Goldilocks zone or wherever, where the cost of living's low, but the labor, are there any other like secret little Goldilocks towns, metropolitan areas?
Off the top of my head, I've obviously focused on that's where I live, but there are some others. Chicago's a good one because Chicago is in the Midwest. Yep. Typically the Midwest, the wages there are lower than the national average, or the corrections are below the national average for all of the different positions. But in the Chicago area, for transportation material moving workers, the cost is about 8% higher than the rest of the nation. So yeah, Chicago. It's typically larger cities in a geographic area that the compensation is corrected below the average too.
How do you think cities where big airlines have pilot bases affects all of this? Because the argument of business aviation and quality of life is certainly valid. And as an airline pilot, living in base obviously makes your quality of life much better. So I'm curious, are the rates higher in those cities where big airlines have, like DFW or Chicago, have pilot domiciles because a lot of pilots therefore go to the airlines because they can live in base and then that drives the pay up? Or how do you see that?
Well, the one argument I would use to refute that is Atlanta. Atlanta is one of those cities that's in a southern area, and the geographic corrections are lower than the national average, and so is the local one. In Atlanta, transportation material moving workers make less than the national average. So Atlanta, Denver's higher, DFW, as we mentioned, slightly higher, and then the cities on the West Coast. I guess Alaska's got its base in Seattle. I don't know who's based. In San Francisco, obviously United is a big hub there. Now it's got another big hub in Denver. As I mentioned, Denver's like the DFW, although Denver's in the West. So depending on the survey, that's higher than the national average.
That's interesting. We're in such a localized market here in Phoenix, but essentially almost everyone in business aviation that's leaving for the airlines here in Phoenix, they're going to Southwest because they have a huge domicile there. It's pretty easy to get. And so it's like this very localized thing that I think really affects business aviation. Is Southwest hiring? And is Phoenix a gettable base, and is it an attractive place to be? That makes a huge difference in our very local market.
Yeah, no, it absolutely. And I don't know what BLS folds in. Flying pilots, obviously pilots in general and material moving workers like us are included in that number. I don't know what cities they attribute it to. Do they attribute it to the base where the airlines are? Do they attribute it to where the people live? How in their data collection efforts? I imagine it's attributed to the city. I think in a city like Phoenix, and Phoenix is slightly above the national average. I think it's like 1 or 2% above the national average for transportation material moving workers. What that usually means is that there are enough lower paying cost of labor jobs that it offsets the higher cost of labor that those of us in the pilot world might enjoy. And that's what brings it down. And I wish that the BLS had come up with a more discrete way of categorizing where we fit in the big scheme of things from a worker classification perspective. Sadly, they just didn't. So that's the dilemma we're left with.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so quickly changing right now. That's just, to me, seems like such a challenge. But the thing I didn't really understand is that folks can actually hire someone like yourself to come in as that third party to talk. And I think that's Max and I have talked about this before. Like, there needs to be almost like a sports agent type person out there that can be this third party that can come and help, because there's this, in a lot of business aviation jobs, there is this delicate relationship that you're trying to balance. And so it's like, there needs to be that sort of third party to kind of help with this negotiation. So can you tell us some stories about your times, like getting in the middle of the third party? Is it usually successful? Like, what do you see out there?
So I will tell you that the times, there are different ways in which people retain me. And to your earlier point, yes, having a third party come in, I tell people this, repeatedly. I am actually, why I love helping people. I don't personally care whether you get paid more or not. What I care is what the data is and what the relationship is of your compensation level to the data. That's what I care about, because I'm the data guy. So having a third party with no agenda come in and examine the compensation levels often pays huge dividends. I will tell you that any time I have been retained and the people have a genuine interest in wanting to try to do the right thing and been successful. Now, where my data has been forced upon people, and usually that's not part of the study. It's usually part of them just buying the reports and, pushing it in the face of their HR and say, here, this is what this guy says. You need to do this. Yeah, that's not going to work out well. But I have been very, very successful in helping flight departments get higher levels of compensation when the HR folks or the executives or whomever has been willing to look at the data with an honest glance and see what the data says. And in some cases, it's been validating data. They're already paying well, and the data I provide says, see, we are paying you guys well. Now, oh, wow, we are being paid well. It provides an outside source with no dog in the fight validating what we're doing, and that's been helpful also.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I guess I never thought about it the other way of like pilots always think they need to make more, but there is a time when you need to show them, no, you're actually like doing well. Like be content, be happy with where you're at.
Yeah, don't worry, be happy. No, really, that's exactly what the data has proven. It's proven that, they're already being paid adequately or well. Slight adjustments they need to be, but by and large it says, see, here's this guy from the outside who's got no dog in the fight telling you that you're being adequately compensated. So that sort of thing. So yeah.
When you find yourself in that position, kind of being the neutral third-party middleman, do you ever have to interject some of that pilot knowledge in there as well? As be like, listen, this is what the data and the salary surveys, but here's the other thing you have to understand. If this guy leaves, you can't get training on this airplane it's booked out over 12 months. And that new type rating is going to cost this much. So do you ever bring in those pilot factors? You put your pilot hat on and say, hey, there's these other things to consider besides just the straight numbers and how they reflect with the data?
Well, so usually if an aviation manager is part of the discussion, and typically they are, I don't have to bring those points in because they will do it for me. I will validate the points when they bring them up and certainly have a discussion around those. When it's just me and the executive or me and the compensation professionals, I do bring those points up because they don't have the knowledge to do that. So yes, to your point, yes, it's helpful sometimes for me to have that. What I have found repeatedly is that the cost of the type rating for the newer, sexier stuff, the G7500s, 650s, and the 600s on the Gulfstream side is ridiculous. It's like a buck or $1.25. And yet you will find some of my most stringent compensation battles I've had have been to pay people who are flying those airplanes right. I had to build a new category of jet class in the calculator to account for two airplanes that are very unique, and that's the G450 and the G500, because both of those type ratings allow somebody to fly an airplane that's larger by just walking in and doing it. I don't know if there's differences training between the two off the top of my head. There may be.
Yeah, there is. I used to fly a 450, but it's still the same type rating for the 550 and the 5. So
yeah, exactly. So you can just walk in and do it. That requires a different level. But when you find people that have already stroked the checks to pay, $100,000 or $125,000 type rated, and then they're not willing to cough up an extra $20 or $5,000 a year to keep these people, fully knowing that it's going to cost them 5 times that much if they leave. As you mentioned, you can even get training. It's very exasperating. I will tell you that most of them come around if you belabor that point, because they're not stupid. They may have the cognitive dissonance of not wanting to agree with the data, and in some cases you encounter that, as I mentioned earlier. But in most cases, that will come around.
What I would love to say if I was you one day in one of those negotiations to be like, listen, here's the bottom line. You need to decide if you want to pay this guy this number, or you want to pay the next guy this number and potentially a type rating on top of it, because he'll just leave and just see what the look on their face would be.
Well, to your point though, Max, I mean, this is essentially what we're seeing in at least in our local area, is pilots are voting with their feet, unfortunately. It's almost like flight departments all have to learn the same lesson. Many times the lesson has to be learned by somebody leaving. So how many of your clients are engaging you, are saying, hey, we just lost a pilot, I guess we need to get serious about this? I mean, how big of a catalyst is that for this, Chris? It's
significant. More clients who have come to me and say, we need better compensation ranges. We need to do a comp study here. We just lost a pilot. We lost 2 pilots. We're hiring new pilots. What are your recommendations on doing this to make it worthwhile for the people that we're going to hire? That is a frequent theme.
Yeah.
Chris, here's the other kind of a weird question, but when this whole big train that we're on riding that's going full speed ahead right now in terms of aviation and pilots ultimately comes to the station and grinds to a halt, do you think people will be coming back to you and be like, all right, we're going to need to cut these guys' pay? How little can we pay these guys and still be in line with the market?
Well, unfortunately, I've not gotten to that particular predicament yet. And to your point, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So you guys are probably following the airlines. United has signed a tentative agreement where their pilots have accepted a 30% pay raise. So that's going to drive. The Southwest has just approved a vote to strike because they're not getting what they want with their people. American recently turned down a 19% pay raise. So all of this will eventually have an impact on the business aviation market, but it just takes all the filter over. I think the demand pool, everybody talks about, is there a pilot shortage? Is there not a pilot shortage? We're very flippant. Some people say, well, there's a pay shortage, not a pilot shortage, or there's a qualified pilot shortage. Words or terms matters. What matters is there is a high demand for pilots. That demand is not being filled by the available supply at the moment, and probably not for the foreseeable future. Whether there's a shortage or not, I don't know, don't care. What I know is the demand level is high. And as long as the demand level is high, compensation is going to be driven up. It's just the basic law of economics. And I don't see that situation changing anytime soon.
The other thing we've talked about too, Chris, I'd be interested in your opinion, is that on some of these entry-level jets or turboprops, these smaller airplanes that obviously have a smaller total budget, and is ultimately, do you see pilot pay getting so high, even for any pilot position, including those lower level ones, where the percentage of the total budget versus what you have to pay the pilot or pilots just gets so out of whack, it doesn't even pencil anymore?
Well, Cheryl Barton is a good friend of mine. She and I work together a lot. And so we've kind of gone back to, there's dreams. You've got the show me the money side, and you've got the how much is enough side. Do I think at some point things will stabilize? I don't know. At least the inflation piece of this is going to continue to have an effect where owners are going to have to pay more whether they want to or not, just because they need to pay their people a wage, which they can, pay their bills with and buy groceries and feed their families and that sort of thing. So I think that will always be there. The other pieces and parts of maintaining airplanes, I think, are going to continue to increase in cost. Fuel's going to increase in cost, as are hourly rates for maintainers, as are, the cost of buying parts and all that kind of stuff. So will pilot compensation become a disproportionate element of the overall budget equation? I don't know the answer to that. I think everything's going to rise. Will pilot comp get so large out as the others? I don't know. I think fuel will continue to be the largest line item in any airplane budget, and maintenance will be a larger line item than compensation is typically. I can't answer the question because I honestly know. It's
no
not,
one has a crystal ball.
Yeah,
it's just an interesting thing.
Where's your crystal ball, Chris?
Yeah,
come on.
What I will tell you is I don't foresee that at any time in the near future, even with the rates at which compensation is increasing. So I don't foresee that.
Interesting. In my opinion, especially in business aviation and that smaller, some airplanes, are you starting to see more departments say, you know what, we're going to employ one full-time pilot and then contract more? Is that a way that people are looking to kind of keep some of these costs under control? We're going to pay one pilot significantly more to stay and kind of run the show and then bring in supplemental help when we need it. What do you think?
I have not seen that. I will tell you that the two aircraft flight department, or the one aircraft flight department, which is my current operation, and it sounds like one of yours based on our conversations before the show, I thought that was going to be a construct that was going to decrease in regularity. I have not seen that. It's at least maintaining this. So I think people are willing to stick with two pilots. As long as they're willing to pay the contractor for a third person every once in a while, so the folks in the cockpit can have a life when they want to have a life. That's a do. It's when they're not willing to do that it becomes more difficult. But I do know that people are becoming more and more reluctant to hire extra staff because the cost of paying the staff is larger. So it is having some effect in that regard. But by the same token, I will tell you that a lot of flight departments come and they don't want to use less staff. They want to, maintain the level of staff they've got, or even in some cases increase it. And they want the compensation information to do that. They're not afraid to pay the bill. So that happens also.
Well, I think what we can all say at the end of the day, it's good to have hot skills.
That's right. Hot skill. We're going to make a drop of that. Hot skills.
Hot skills.
Yeah. Chris, I think a lot of our listeners are struggling with a lot of these topics right now. So hopefully folks have found this useful. And if people want to get in touch with you, maybe engage your services, how can we find you?
You can find me online, and I'm also on LinkedIn. I've got several thousand following on LinkedIn. You can find me very easily there. Always happy to have a conversation about compensation. You can send me a direct message on LinkedIn. You can send me an email. I'm always happy to have a conversation about that sort of thing, and happy to share with what services I can provide to make your compensation life better.
How many LinkedIn direct messages do you get that go, I make $100,000 flying an Excel. Is that good?
Every once in a while you get something like that, but typically people have more general questions.
Okay.
But not terribly many, fortunately.
That's good. All right. Well, Chris, we always like to get our guests out, give them a chance to give us a story. You mentioned before that you fly a Falcon 900. Any good stories from your flying days?
Yes, I'm very fortunate. I got to fly fighters in the Air Force. I flew the A-10 and the F-16, and I got to Western Europe from 500 to 250 feet because it was during the Cold War. We were around low, so that was pretty cool. Yeah, I would say probably one of the best stories I have from those days, and that was pretty interesting, was back when there were two Germanys, we had a forward operating location that we used to fly out of called Nordbrunnich. It was between Cologne and Bonn on the west side of the Rhine River. And we would fly back to Britain. We would fly initially high altitude to get out of the controlled airspace there, but then we would drop to 500 feet and we would fly out the mouth of the Rhine River in formation across the North Sea at 500 feet, passing all the oil derricks and everything. And you would show up and land it. And we were flying out of RAF Bentwaters and Woodbridge. And Bentwater, they were twin airfields about 5 miles apart. Woodbridge was perpendicular to the coastline because it was built as a bomber recovery base during World War II. And a lot of the buildings we were in were World War II vintage buildings, I'll tell you. But it was just very interesting to come back to the UK and land on an airfield like that and just be grateful that people fought the war that they fought and that we were still out there defending freedom and doing all that kind of thing. It just felt very rewarding to be part of that.
Wow.
Cool.
That is really cool. Well, Chris, we would appreciate your time joining us. I expect many of our listeners will be reaching out, and thank you for the valuable service that you're providing to all the pilots in business
Fighting
aviation.
the good fight.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I like doing it. So yes, it makes money for me, but to be out there providing something that is in fact the industry and a service to people is great. I enjoy doing it.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
We appreciate it. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Well, that was a great conversation with Dr. Broyhill. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about how salary surveys work.
Yeah, I learned a lot. I had no idea that anything to that level was available, and I would certainly not hesitate to use that service because he knows what he's talking about, and breaking it down the way he does and utilizing the salary surveys that we all know and love, but taking it just those further steps to really zero in and sharpen the pencil, I think is super valuable.
Plus, being able to be available for him to talk to your HR professional, I think is also really valuable too, because it'd be like my kid coming home with a piece of paper and being like, here, you need to give me this. The teacher says, give me this money. You wouldn't be like, hey, let me talk to the teacher for a second.
Hell yeah.
I need this for a field trip, So he knows how to communicate in the right way. So Aircom Calculator, check it out and see what's really going on out there. Moving on to flight advice, which of course is brought to you by our friends at Harvey Watt. We've got some great flight advice for you. Visit their website, harveywatt.com, to check out all of the offerings they provide to professional pilots. Most importantly, loss of medical insurance. That little piece of paper can really cost you a lot of lost income if you don't have it in your pocket. I know it's tough to fold. You need to hang on to it. harveywatt.com. All right, Joel, what's in the flight advice hopper for today?
I'm a regional FO with about 600 hours in the right seat. In college, I was lucky enough to be accepted into the Delta Propel program. Although it is a phenomenal opportunity that I likely don't deserve, there is one aspect of the program that has me a bit concerned. To remain in Delta Propel, one must take the first available upgrade. With the current shortage of captains, this means that I will need to upgrade at the FAA minimum of 1,000 hours, Part 121 turbine time, after having seen only one full year of line flying. I seem to be doing well in terms of knowledge and flying skill, but I still haven't achieved a great degree of comfort in the jet. My landings are consistently safe, and I make an effort to fly in challenging conditions as much as possible. However, I still feel an uneasiness in my stomach when it's my turn to put it down. To add to the anxiety, I will be upgrading just after my birthday at the ripe old age of 23. I'll be among a much older pilot group, which is daunting to say the least. When I started on the line, I thought I would be perfectly comfortable at this point, although I suspect I'll gain an increased amount of comfort by the time 1,000 hours rolls around. I know that my feelings will not have entirely abated. Is it normal to feel a little uncomfortable at this stage? Or should I plan to kiss the evil widget goodbye and set my sights on other opportunities? P.S. I understand that my concerns may seem to be those of a petulant and short-sighted child. It is not lost on me just how easy I have it compared to those that came before me. In the not-so-distant past, FOs were forced to sit in the right seat for years and endure abysmal wages before even thinking about upgrading, and then fly years more before a major would even look at them. I have nothing to complain about, and only seek advice concerning the direction of a career that I am so lucky to have. Anonymous.
First off, I think he's the opposite of a petulant and short-sighted child. Like, at least he's looking at himself. Because I think a lot of people will just look at the end game, be like, oh, look how young I am and advancing so quickly, blah, and just take the opportunity that's put in front of them without necessarily considering if they're ready or not. So I think it's actually a pretty mature thing to be writing about, but that is going to be a problem because people progress, whether it's through their private pilot certificate or stepping up to your first jet and everything else at different rate. We've seen that throughout our careers, right? And to just put a blanket, you will take the first available upgrade. That's going to be a problem for some. What do you think?
There's no way you can cookie cutter everybody. I think, practically speaking, here's what I would do. I don't know all the ins and outs of the Delta Propel program, but I believe that there's like a mentor that you have or some type of like guidance that you can get from them. I would go to them right away and be like, hey, help me develop a plan of action to get more comfortable and make sure that I'm getting everything out of this last, let's see, he or she says they have 600 hours in the right seat. So they have 400 more hours to go. Help me to maximize these next 400 hours so that I can give it my best shot to be as comfortable as I can in the right seat and landing the airplane, et cetera, and go from there. And I would say give it your best shot, taking advice from mentors and peers. And if you get to 1,000 hours and you're still not comfortable and you have put forth the effort to try and make yourself as comfortable as possible with the help of the Propel program, and you're not there, then if they want to kick you out of the program, then
I think you would go to them and say, listen, it's time to available upgrade is here and I don't feel ready. If you're not going to be the first or the last. Not everybody is ready at first available upgrade, period.
Yeah.
And it's irresponsible to push somebody when they're telling you they're not ready when you're putting everybody else's lives in the mix. It's just not right. So
sure. But what I would not do is wait until I got to 1,000 hours and then go to the Propel people and be like, yeah, by the way, I'm not going to upgrade. I'm not comfortable. I would be proactive now.
Well, yeah, at least plant seeds. Say, hey, I'm at 600 hours. I certainly don't feel comfortable now. What if I'm not comfortable at 1,000 hours? Then what's the plan? Like, what if you've got there and you've never held and then figured out a bingo fuel and diverted, or you haven't there's just some stuff that doesn't happen very often.
There's a lot of factors.
In the course of that amount of time, you just might not do. And the first time you do something like that, you don't want to be in the left seat.
Right. At 23, yeah.
How to practice at 23, yeah. It's just...
Do not be pressured into upgrading. Listen, I don't personally believe things are going to change for regional airline pilots from a hiring standpoint in the near future. Like, if it comes down to something where you're like, listen, I'm not comfortable and I have to get out of the program, what does that mean? You're still going to probably get hired at a job in the next couple of years. It's not the end of the world. But again, take the proactive approach, seek help, try and really take advantage of those next 400 hours. And I would be surprised if a program, if you were doing everything that they told you to do and you were, using all those folks for advice and you said, sorry, I'm still not comfortable, and they're going to drum you out. I mean, I don't think that would happen. But
the thing is, he's 23 years old. He likely doesn't have kids or wife and all these other attachments. Like, if you have to go move bases to the East Coast and go slug it out for a winter, like I remember the first time I did that, learning to fly in Arizona, doing all that, and then went and flew out of Chicago and flew east primarily. I learned so much that winter just about slugging around in all of that nasty weather. So like you said, give it your best effort and expose yourself as much as you can. That may be doing something uncomfortable, like picking up and bidding New York or something that's not your first choice or your second or third or fourth or fifth.
And specifically, if it's landing the airplane, maybe there's like a base that does like shorter, more frequent legs per day versus longer. I don't know. I don't know what airline you're at.
I don't know. Yeah.
You'd have to look, so there's a lot of things, And I'll tell you, I remember at the regionals, a lot of captains I flew with were super cool. And when you'd start a trip, they would be like, hey, what landings do you want? What legs do you want to fly? And some guys would be like, you can have them all if you want, Maybe that's something you could start asking the captains you fly with too as well. Maybe they'll give you extra landings. But overall, it's going to just be repetition. You have that imposter syndrome. I know exactly what you're talking about. You're like, am I really in my 20s, like really about to land a jet with 50 or 70 people in the back? Like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? So you just got to keep doing it. Fake it till you make it. Anything else to say on that, Max?
That's how you're going to end it. Fake it till you make it.
No, we're going to cut that
all
part.
This great advice.
Yeah, I know.
That's what you throw in there.
I know.
No, we're not cutting that. No, we're leaving this in because that is just You had all this great advice, and then you just completely blew it up at the end.
It's terrible.
Fake it till you make it. That's literally the opposite of all of the advice you just gave. Start that over, but we're not cutting it. In summation, Dylan, what would you like to say?
I think you just fake it till you make it.
No. Okay. Make responsible decisions. Take all the advice before the fake it till you make it part. Idiot. All right. Joel, let's move on.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for flight advice. That is, of course, the section of the show where we allow folks to write in, even anonymously if they want. You can visit our website at 215podcast.com to visit the flight advice form. Fill it out, send it, and we'll give you really good advice until the very end where we'll give you really bad advice.
We'll just completely blow it up.
We'll just blow it. Well, I never said I was Diamond Dog. That's going to do it.
Thanks for coming on the show, Chris.
Yeah.
What else you got?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you to everybody. It was good to be back and do a regular episode after taking a little bit of a break.
Here we go.
Thanks to our friends at Harvey Watt, of course, Advanced Aircrew Academy, and Tim Hope. You can check out more information about all of their offerings to our listeners in the show notes below. Thanks to Joel, who's really putting in the work here to get us more organized. It's like the coach.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
Yeah, he's giving the signals. He's going to go...
Giggity.
That's right.
It's a job.
Yeah.
All right, Joe. Great job.
Giggity.
Oh, my God.
Oh, man.
You're never going to let that one down. I love it. Flexibility.
It's the key to air power. We'll see you next time.
The statements made in this show are our own opinions and do not reflect, nor were they under any direction from any of our employers.